Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see such a large crowd. Welcome to our seminar, faculty seminar. My name is Nazim Chichek. I'm the Associate Dean Research for the faculty. And it's a real pleasure today to host a good friend and a colleague here to present a talk on a very interesting and controversial topic. So I'm going to introduce Francis to you first, and then we'll get right into it. So Francis Zvomuya is a professor in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Manitoba, where he served as department head from 2018 to 2023. He holds a PhD in soil science from the University of Minnesota, an MSc from the University of Reading in England, and a BSc from the University of Zimbabwe. Before joining the University of Manitoba in 2008, Francis worked as a research associate at the University of Minnesota and as a visiting fellow and term scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge, Alberta. His research interests are centered around contaminated site remediation and land reclamation. His recent research has included wetland-based phytoremediation of municipal lagoons, reclamation of oil and natural gas well sites, fate and transport of manure-borne antimicrobials, and utilization of recycled nutrients. So without further ado, please help me welcome Francis.
Okay, thanks. Nazim, can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks for the introduction, and I should thank you for not going to our website to get the bio from there, because there's a little story about that. I hope I'll be able to move this. Okay, so we submitted a manuscript, right? I was a co-author on that, and then I got an email from the publisher asking me to check the bio. So they had already drafted a bio for me. They said, oh, go ahead and check to make sure that everything is right. That was a couple of days ago. And so I check, I see, well, it says PhD, University of Manitoba. And so I was so sure that it wasn't Crystal, because she doesn't make mistakes like that. I was so sure that I was the one who sent the wrong information to her. So I went to the paper trail, and sure enough, you can see over here. So not only did I commit that infraction, but also my geography was wrong. So I had that as the University of Manitoba in the US. So this has been on the website since 2022. So obviously my colleagues, when they go there, they are not checking anything else. They check, oh, is he publishing, and things like that. Yeah, so I thought that was funny. So I contacted Crystal right away, and immediately she corrected that. So now we have the correct information. Okay. So thanks Nazim, for the introduction and for the invitation to present to the faculty. I was looking back, I think it's been maybe 8 or 9 years since I presented a seminar to the faculty. So it's been quite a long time. So I do appreciate the opportunity, and also for you grabbing me out of my hideout in my sabbatical. So it's lonely out there, so it's good to be here and see many people around. And I would like to acknowledge our colleagues from south of the border. We have come for the Manitoba Soil Science Society. You can see, I believe all of them are in the third row there. A very warm welcome, and it's really warm too. So it doesn't feel like winter in Winnipeg. So I appreciate your coming around. I understand there was a tour of the department. I wasn't able to join that. Obviously, I was delayed. So a very warm welcome. And so I won't talk much about the controversy surrounding this, but I'll just let some of our results talk, right? So pipelines, energy-related activities, they've been in the news a lot. And a lot of times, the controversies that that make the headlines, okay? So I'll give a little bit of background to the energy industry in Canada in general, and then I'll focus on British Columbia in particular, because we are doing a project there was since just before the pandemic, 2019. That's when we started a project that's centered around the pipelines there that pass through agricultural land, specifically cropland. Okay, so I'll share some of the results that we have. If you want to know more, Clemens, the PhD student who is working on this project, he will be presenting 2 papers. So one of them is on microbial diversity and abundance. We are working with Mario Tenuta on that. So you have a poster presentation on that, and you also present some of the results from controlled experiments that we have conducted to date. Okay, and I would like to acknowledge my colleagues whom I've been working with since 2019 on this project. Some are still students, others were postdocs, and many of them are now colleagues. Okay, so I have Clemens Mitre is here. He is the PhD student working on the project. Teresa Adesanya used to be in the department, but she's now a faculty member with UNBC. Inoka is right here in the corner there. And then we have Efwa Manta, I saw her, she's somewhere in the back there. Okay? And there are many others whom we have been working with on aspects of this project. So it's a project that was supposed to be 2 years. So when we applied for funding, the funding organization said, you know what, we are only interested in 1 year. And I said, well, to us, it doesn't have any value. I can't train a graduate student on the project. And we can't publish, field research done over just 1 year. So I persuaded them. They agreed to go for 2 years. And then we leveraged funds from MITAX. And so we had a PhD student. And so for PhD students, MITAX supports for up to 4 years. And so I talked with the funders, and they agreed. And so I said, well, we'll still have your deliverables after 2 years, but if you can let your funding drip, so we are able to support the graduate student through the end of their program. So it worked really well. Now, because of the pandemic, things were very slow, going to the field. We had lots of restrictions. And so some of the measurements that we had planned on initially, we were not able to carry those out. And so after 2 years, we talked with the funders, and they agreed, to extend that, and they provided some additional funding. So we've been very excited. So just a bit of background on the energy industry, very, very important, in Canada. You can see in terms of natural gas, which I'll be focusing on, Canada ranks 5th worldwide in terms of production of natural gas, and they rank 6th in terms of exports. And if you look at the contribution to the economy, it's huge, almost $170 billion, which is more than 7% of the national GDP. So it's a huge contribution to the economy. But when you have energy resources, you extract them, you have to transport them, right, where they are consumed. So sometimes they use tankers, they use trains. But pipelines, they are considered relatively, on a relative basis, so they are considered relatively safe, more efficient than other means, and reliable, and also cost effective. But if you look at the footprint there, it's almost a million, right, kilometers of pipelines that we have, starting from right at the production wells, all the way up to the transmission and distribution lines. So almost a million kilometers. So there are different different types of pipelines. So the ones that we focused on in the research that we are doing in northeastern British Columbia are the gathering lines. So those are the pipelines that collect the natural gas from the wells and then takes it to batteries or storage before it is transferred from there. So there's 250,000 of those, so quite a footprint there. In terms of size, they range anywhere from about 10 centimeters to 1 foot in diameter. Okay, and then you have the feeder lines that transfers the natural gas from storage or processing plants to the transmission lines. So transmission pipelines are those that transport the natural gas to distribution lines or to the city gate where it's ultimately distributed to businesses, industry, and also to residences. And then finally you have the distribution lines. So that's what we have, for example, in the cities for distributing for different purposes. So the transmission lines, they are also cross borders, so from one province to another, and they can also be international. So there are a few of those that cross from Canada into the US. So those are transmission lines. So quite some footprint that we have there. So in Canada, so the ultimate regulator is the federal government. So the Canadian Energy Regulator, so they are responsible at national level for regulating the production and also the operation of these pipelines. So for those pipelines, that cross provincial borders and those that cross international borders. So at local level, within provinces, there are different agencies that are responsible for regulating those pipelines. Okay, so I can see Alberta, that's a huge producer, and you can see its contribution to the overall footprint of these pipelines. And then British Columbia, that's the second largest producer of natural gas in Canada, and their footprint well, not as huge as the Alberta one, but nonetheless quite big. So the British Columbia, well, it used to be called Oil and Gas Commission, but now it's changed that name to British Columbia Energy Regulator. So they are the ones who are responsible at provincial level for regulating the pipelines. And then Manitoba, we don't have natural gas production in the province. We do have oil production in the southwest, and well, production has been going up actually by 400% compared to 2000. But nonetheless, we do need pipelines for distribution. So we get most of our natural gas from the Alberta, British Columbia, and then it's distributed locally. I believe Hydro, I saw Wara from Hydro here. And so they are the ones who do most of the distribution within southern Manitoba. Okay? And so, like I said, BC, the second largest producer of natural gas. You can look there at the reserves there. Almost 6 billion cubic feet per day of production. This is as of 2021. And now, because of new technology, now they are able to do this horizontal drilling. So, in conjunction with fracking, they are now able to access resources that only a couple decades ago were inaccessible. And so now, because of that, they have reserves that could last more than more than 300 years. Okay, so as you can see, it contributes in a huge way to the national economy. You can see on the right there, not very clear, but that's the map there that shows where most of the natural gas activities are take place in the province. So that's northeastern British Columbia. So our research was centered around this area here. So that's the Peace River region. You can see all that brown that you see there. That's gas-related activity. Okay, so that's a lot of it. So we have Fort St. John over here, and I guess somewhere down there you have Dawson Creek, for those of you who are familiar with that part of British Columbia. And then our study was located in this area, very, very dense, and you have, more than, in some cases, like more than 25 wells per square kilometer. So that's huge. Okay, so in terms of the pipeline, so more than 46,000 kilometers, and those that are regulated at provincial level is almost 90% of them. And of those, more than 22,000 transport natural gas. Okay, so natural gas, well, this is what they refer to as sweet natural gas. Sweet because it doesn't contain high concentrations of sulfur compounds. And then you have sour gas because it contains a lot of sulfur compounds. Okay, then you have 13%. They carry liquid hydrocarbons like ethane, pentane, butane, and so forth. And then the remainder carry water and other gases and liquids. Okay. So what's the problem? So the problem is that in that part of British Columbia, there's a lot of activity, right, which is not news. But what's different is that that's also the part of British Columbia where most of their crop production takes place. Okay. So it's they have prairie conditions. So in other words, that's the prairie side of British Columbia. Okay. So they have, it's protected in a way, so it falls under what's referred to as the agricultural land reserve. So agricultural land reserve, what it means is that the primary function, the primary land use for that area is agriculture. So everything else comes secondary. And that applies to natural gas or energy-related activities. They come secondary, but there's a lot of activity in there, and the understanding is that it's temporary, but it's been going on since the 1950s, the early 1950s. Okay, and also, it's also based on the understanding that after the activities are done, or after they lay down these pipelines, they will do good reclamation, land reclamation, to bring the land or the cropland back to the productivity that existed before they disturbed that field. So that's the understanding there. Okay, so things don't always go right sometimes, and farmers have been complaining that their yields, so they are compensated for up to 3 years. Okay, with the assumption that, well, once reclamation is done, within 3 years, your land should be back to full productivity like existed before the disturbance. Okay? So farmers are saying, well, no, that's not happening. But then regulators and the pipeline operators are saying, well, we reclaimed, and then the province, the regulators, they came, they did an assessment, and it passed. Okay? So that happens, right? After they do that, unfortunately, the assessments, the way they do it, they don't look at the yields. They look at plant height, they look at plant populations, or plant counts. So if they match 80% of the counts and plant heights on the undisturbed sites, then they say that, well, that's successfully reclaimed. So that's what happens. So it turns out things don't always correlate. So those high plants and those dense populations, they don't necessarily translate to high yields or good yields. Okay, so that's the issue that's taking place there. So that's where this project, that's how it was born. Because the province was insisting that, well, reclamation is being done right, or the industry rather, but farmers are saying, well, what we are seeing really is the opposite. So you are only paying us for 3 years, but we are seeing more than 20% yield losses for way more than that. So in the US, parts of the US, they pay for up to 5 years for yield losses on a sliding scale. So 1 year after the disturbance or after completion of reclamation, you are paid, the farmer is paid 100%. In some cases, they have to negotiate. They have to negotiate. So 100%, and then in the second year, 75%. Third year, 50%. Fourth year, 25%. Fifth year and onwards, 0%. So what they are saying is that after 4 years, well, your land is good to go. It's just as good as nothing happened. Okay? So that's the farmers, they don't believe that. They don't believe that that's what's happening. Okay? So like I said, we can exist together, right? Energy and agriculture, as long as clean up the mess after the disturbance. That was the assumption. Property owners, they cannot deny access. So they negotiate where the pipeline should be located, like, the pipeline companies, they decide, they do a survey and decide which is the best location for the pipelines. And the farmer can object, they can go for arbitration. And in worst cases, they can go to the lawyer. But in the end, in most cases, well, the industry, gets their way. So the farmer cannot say no, okay? They cannot say no according to the law, okay? So compensation, like I said, farmers believe that they are being shortchanged, okay? So why are they a problem? Because of yield losses, but there's data to back up the farmers. There have been some, research that has been done. Not a lot of work that's been done on these pipelines, but those that have been done, you can see some of them showing like up to 50% losses in yields. And also deterioration in some soil properties. You can see some physical properties that are indicated here. Okay? So this is what it looks like. That's the configuration of a right-of-way. Okay? So the right-of-way is that area immediately in the vicinity of the trench. So this is the trench that they dig when they are laying down the pipeline. Okay? And then you do have, they are required to salvage or to store the soil, okay, while they are digging. So they use what's referred to as a two-lift salvaging. So before the mid to late 80s, there was no requirement like that. So what they would do is they dig out the soil and mix the topsoil and the subsoil. But now they are required to store those separately, so that after reclamation you have your topsoil, the fertile soil, in the location from where you removed it. Okay, so having this setup on the left there, that's the soil piling area. Okay, then on the right you have all traffic taking place on the right. Okay, so when they are done, put back the subsoil, the topsoil, and then sometimes they use amendments during the reclamation process just to speed up restoration of the land. So this right-of-way, which is the footprint, it can extend all the way up to 50 meters, okay? 50 meters, so running across the across the field. So what happens, like if they want to construct another pipeline, they try to minimize the footprint. So they lay it down next to an existing pipeline. So we do have some cases in some of the fields that we tested where you have maybe 6 or 7 pipelines that are side by side. So they refer that as a corridor. So that's a pipeline corridor. Okay. And so the depth of that, it goes down to about 2 meters, up to 2 meters sometimes. Okay, but you do have some that are very close to 1 meter. You do find, I remember a couple years back in Western Manitoba, there was an incident there where a farmer was doing their operations in the field, like very shallow, like just 12 centimeters, and then they hit a pipeline there. So that pipeline had been in the ground for, I believe, up to 60 years. Okay, so when it was buried down to 60 centimeters. So now it was, the cover, the soil cover was just about 12 centimeters. Okay, so that was a huge accident. Fortunately, nobody was injured in that case. Okay, so they tried to avoid, some vulnerable sites within the field, like wetlands, for example, and some unstable sites. In the process, in other cases, it's unavoidable. You see in the picture there, that's the corridor. You do have 5 pipelines there that go across. You can see that's a very long strip of land there. So they pass through that. Okay. And so our question was, we have all these pipelines that have been laid down for a very, very long time. Some of them are since the 60s. Okay, how long does it take for those to recover? Because farmers are saying, well, our land is not recovering. So wanted to see how long that would take for the land to recover. So we used a chrono sequence because you can't start this experiment, right? Like if you want to see, is it going to take a dozen years, 20 years? That's a 20-year study. So fortunately, because they have 5 pipelines that are of different ages, we used a chrono sequence of those. So we selected pipelines that were between 4 years old and about 12, 13 years old. Okay? There were some sites that were younger than 4 years old, but you go there, the farmers, they don't even do anything. If they try to transplant, the entire crop, it just gets run over by weeds. So we saw some sites that were 1, 2 years old, so farmers don't even bother to grow crops in there. So the purpose was to see, okay, how are the yields changing as the pipeline right-of-way gets older? Okay, are they improving, and at what pace are they improving? And also looking at some of the indicators of soil productivity, soil health, chemical parameters, soil biology, and also looking at some physical properties of the soils. Okay, so that's the site there I showed you earlier. So soils are mostly silty loams. Lots of crop production taking place, so that's some of the soil properties there. Organic matter, they have about anywhere from 4% to about 6% organic matter, so not that high. And the pH, you can see there consistently about neutral, so pH of 7. Okay? So crops, a range of crops, wheat, oats, barley, alfalfa, those are the most common in the rotations in the area. Okay? And so, well, that's the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. That's where those natural gas fields are located. So that's the same basin that stretches through Alberta into Saskatchewan. So a lot of gas there. So until about the early 2000s, they were extracting mostly what they refer to as conventional gas. So conventional gas, what it means is that it's coming from formations where the rocks are porous. So they are porous, so it's very easy to extract. So mostly sandstones. But those resources, those reserves were diminishing pretty fast. And now they came up with technology for doing horizontal drilling. So that's what's shown here. So that way they are able to extract, from reserves that were unthinkable only a couple of decades ago. So they are now using horizontal drilling because the shale that holds that gas is very tight. So they call it tight gas because it's coming from very tight rock formations, which means they are not porous. So what they do is they use, in conjunction with that horizontal drilling, they use fracking in order to make the rock more porous, so they are in a better position to extract the natural gas. So almost 30,000 wells in that area have been drilled. And as you can see there, not very clear, but you can see all the purple lines there. Some of them, the tighty ones, those are the gathering wells that I was talking about. Lots and lots of them, and you can see here, this shows the density. Those are in the dark purple there. That's 50 wells per square per 25 square kilometer, and that circle, that's about the area where we are doing this research. So a lot of activity taking place. So we had 3 fields that we monitored. Initially, we wanted to go for more than that, but because of the pandemic, that wasn't feasible. Again, the range, we are looking at sites or pipeline right-of-ways that are 4 to 12 years old, at least as of the time when we started. So some of those by now, they are close to 15, 16 years old. So looked at 4 transects within each right-of-way, and we took a bunch of measurements, including crop variables and lots of soil variables. Okay. Some of the measurements that we made, these are chemical. Some soil health variables we selected. The 3 that are considered more sensitive or more responsive to management. Okay, so we have soil respiration, active carbon, that's permanganate oxidizable carbon, and we also looked at bioavailable nitrogen. So very sensitive. So what it means is that you can detect changes. If there are any significant impacts from management, you should be able to detect those within a few years. Okay. Then we looked at yield. So this is an experiment that we didn't design ourselves, so we're just going with what the farmers have on their lands, okay? So we had no control in terms of what crops are growing in those fields, so we just assessed the crops that the farmers were going with, okay? So yields, I believe Clemens will be talking about in his presentation, the yields of different crops, but in my presentation, I'll just focus on the relative yield. So what we did was, whether it was wheat or oats or canola, we expressed that yield as a percentage or a fraction of the yield in the undisturbed part of the field. So an adjacent part of the field that wasn't impacted by pipeline construction. So we used this concept of relative yield, okay? And then we also took a bunch of soil physical measurements there. So this is just to give us an idea of compaction, okay? How much compaction do we have compared to undisturbed sites? And how is it changing over the years? So we're interested in looking at that. Water flow, we looked at saturated, and we also looked at unsaturated. So we're very interested in the saturated or unsaturated or near saturated, hydraulic conductivity, because we could use those infiltration measurements to infer something about the pores that conduct the water in the soil. So specifically, we were able to use some available models to get estimates, just rough estimates, of those large size pores that are more effective at conducting the or transporting the water within the soil. And we also looked at aggregates and aggregation as well. Okay, so some of the results for the yields, as you can see. So this yellow or orange, that was the youngest. So when we started the experiment, this site was about 4 years old. So we went back to the same site every year. Okay, and that was important because it gave us, a larger sample size. And also, we don't expect a huge difference from 1 year to the next. So, so for each site that we assessed 2 or 3 years, we took average yields for those. And then we expressed those as a fraction of the yield in the undisturbed sites. And so as you can see in the youngest there, you're only getting about a little over 40% of the yield in the disturbed part of the same field. Okay? 9 years later, you still have less than 60%, so you are losing 40%. You are still losing more than 40% of this is the total biomass. So you are losing more than 40%. But if you look at the grain yield, it's the same picture. Okay? So this time in the youngest right-of-way, which is 5 years after completion of the reclamation process, we only have about 37% of the yield in the undisturbed part of the field. So even after 20 years, we are still below 60%. So the farmers are losing more than 40% of the yields compared to the yields that they got before the pipelines were installed in their fields. Okay? So if we look at the soil health indicators, you can also see there, so we have, this is the undisturbed site. So for the active carbon, so that's the label carbon there, well, there's an improvement, but only after 12 years. So up to 9 years, you still have significant reductions, so significantly lower label carbon. The same also for bioavailable nitrogen. So an improvement for that indicator after 9 years. So after 9 years, there's no significant difference between the right-of-way and the undisturbed part of the field. But if you go after 5 years, you still have a significantly lower bioavailable nitrogen. And for soil respiration, we didn't see much change there. So it could be due to a number of factors, or sometimes they add compost or manure or some organic amendments to try and improve the organic status of the soil. And then a bunch of physical properties that we measured. I won't go into detail about those, but they give us an idea of if there are restrictions, if we have restricted water flow in the soil, why is that so? Okay? How is that related to the pore size distribution or the size of the pores that we have in the soil? Okay? Then a measure of compaction, penetration resistance. Again, you can see in the 5 year right-of-way there, you can see that below 10, 12 centimeters, that's still quite compacted, right? I have the red line there. That's the cutoff point, beyond which you start getting restrictions in root growth and root development. And you can see for that, for the blue, for the most part, once you go below 12 centimeters, you still have a lot of compaction there. So if we go to the green, that's the undisturbed. But for the other right-of-ways, the 4.5 and the 6.5-year-old, you can see that there isn't much difference between those and the undisturbed side. Okay? And again, saturated hydraulic conductivity. So it's improving very, very slowly. You can see after about 7 years, it's still way below the conductivity water flow in the undisturbed part of the field. And this is unsaturated. You can see the youngest right-of-way there is to have quite a slow water movement, and this is under unsaturated conditions. Okay? So that's all related to the pore size, so the water conductive porosity. So this again reflects what we saw with the saturated hydraulic conductivity. You can see that we have huge improvements after 6 years. There's no difference compared to the undisturbed parts of the field. Okay? Aggregation, no significant difference, but if you look at that, it looks like there's a steady improvement in the aggregate stability with time, which is good. And so these are some of the results that we have to date. Like I said, the Clements will be covering some of the microbial data that we have collected so far, and some of the results that we have collected also under controlled conditions. And so to summarize, overall we found that even 12 years after reclamation of those pipeline right-of-ways was completed, we still have significantly lower yields on those right-of-ways. Okay? And soil organic carbon in the younger right-of-ways, well, it seems to be improving, but still it's relatively low. So some improvements in soil health, low, but still we see some impacts there from soil compaction. Something very important at the bottom there. So we didn't take any measurements on temperature or moisture, but on talking to farmers, what they were saying is that they noticed faster drying on the right-of-ways. So it's something that we didn't anticipate going there, because what we hoped for at least was that, well, if you're getting heating from those pipelines, what it means is that, well, earlier on in the season, you are going to get faster warming of the soil, which would improve, germination, seedling emergence, and early establishment, which could translate to better yields. So that wasn't happening. Why is that so? Well, we think it's because of the temperature. Okay? Because it's elsewhere where they've looked at temperature profiles, you can have at the surface temperatures being more than 4 degrees Celsius above the temperatures away from the pipeline right-of-way. So we believe that the temperature from those pipelines is having an impact. So those benefits that you would otherwise get from the elevated temperatures, they are countered, right? They are completely cancelled because you have high temperature. That means you have a lot of moisture loss. So your soil is a lot dry, especially in that part of British Columbia where they get semi-arid, right? So they don't get much rainfall. Maybe under irrigation, you would get better yields, but under their conditions. And actually, our results from under controlled conditions, they are showing that. So where you don't have the physical presence of the pipeline, we are seeing that as long as you apply optimum fertilizer, you're getting good yields even after 6 years of reclamation. So that's something that we hope maybe going forward we'll be able to look at. So again, reduced yields even after 12 years. Moisture and temperature might be playing an important role, But importantly, those criteria that I mentioned earlier on, under what they refer to as the Schedule B. So the Schedule B are assessments that are done after completion of the reclamation. And so they look, basically what they look at are the plant heights, and they look at the plant count. That's all. So the assumption that those would translate to yields, apparently that's not happening. So maybe it's time that they look at criteria that take the actual yields into consideration, and maybe that will help come up with a set of compensation rules, a compensation policy that is fair for the landowners. Okay, so some of the work in progress, like I said, we're doing some microbial work and also remote sensing work with NASEM. And we are hoping that we'll start another new phase this year, maybe this spring. So we have talked with the funding organization and also with the BC energy regulator in terms of moving this forward, because we had a relatively small sample size. So we are hoping that we'll look at more size and also introduce some factors like, when did the construction take place for that pipeline, and also when did the reclamation take place? Is it making a difference? But we are also interested in looking at the temperature moisture dynamics there within the soil, and maybe through modeling try to look at what can be done. Is there anything that we can do during reclamation to minimize heat transport from the pipeline all the way up to the surface soil? Or maybe, I don't know, in the design, the way that they design the pipelines, is there a way that they can design them in such a way that they, maybe extract that heat so it doesn't, maybe find a reservoir somewhere, or some technique that they can use just to make sure that they are not losing heat to the surface, because we see that as probably the major issue with this. So finally, a lot of people who have been involved in this. This is a huge sample of those, different aspects of the research. So we are hoping to continue this research. So the energy regulator, they want to see us look in the first year of that next phase, look at 30 sites. Okay, which is massive, because in that work, it was a lot of work. We only looked at 3 fields. So they want us to look initially at 30. So the measurements initially will be just screening. So we look at those sites that are probably waste affected. Then we select a subset, maybe up to 10, 15, that will monitor more intensively going into the second year and into the third year. And I'm hoping to hear back maybe within the next few days. Okay? So that's the story there. You can see here, this is what I was talking about, the temperature. So if you go when the snow is there, you can tell exactly where the pipeline is. So that's the effects of temperature. So we suspect that's what's contributing to those yield losses. Okay.
Thanks for the excellent presentation. We have a few minutes for questions, about 10, 15 minutes. Any questions for Francis?
Yes. Yeah, Francis, thank you for the great talk. In a right-of-way like one of those in your figure, how many sampling sites will you have, and how is your in the right-of-way and in the untouched area, how close are those sampling sites, and how do you account for kind of the soil variation over a distance like that?
Okay, so we went, but so these are huge fields. So what we did was we went every 30 meters. So every 30 meters, and then, from that we take a bunch of subsamples that would compose it, and then we go to another site, we do the same. So because of the challenges with the pandemic and also limited resources, and it's very difficult to find summer students in that part of British Columbia, because of the oil and gas industry, they pay a lot more than we can afford. So it's difficult. They do have a college in Fort St. John. That's where we are based. But yes, those students, they would rather go, work for the industry than work for us. So we had wanted to, and we plan to do that in the second phase, because really we're concentrating on the area immediately above the trench line there. And then we would go outside the right-of-way, so basically more than 50 meters away. So that was the non-impacted part, so the off right-of-way. That's where we took our control samples. So, but what we are hoping to do is that, instead of going from the trench and then to the undisturbed, there's a gradient there. We don't have an idea of how are the yields, how are they decreasing as you go from the undisturbed towards the trench line, because there should be a gradient. So it's something that we are hoping that in the next phase we will look at.
There's a question here first, and then we'll go.
It seems to me that compaction must be what the real problem is. You've got that big construction equipment driving back and forth, and that's astonishing. Last 10 years,
Yes.
How do you get rid of that compaction?
Yes. So a lot of compaction, and our measurements they showed that the penetration resistance measurements they showed that yes there's a lot of compaction, especially on the side. Remember the graphic that I showed you on the right side. That's where all the traffic will be going up and down. So yes, a lot of compaction taking place, and that's restricting water movement.
There's a question there first, and then we'll go there. Go ahead.
Of the 4 different sites, how many farms were represented there?
So we had. So I reported my results not per site, but so what we did was we selected farms or fields that had pipelines that were of the same ages. So, for example, we looked at the 5 or 6 year, 9 year, 12 year. So we'd select farmers where those pipeline ages were represented.
Okay.
Yes.
The reason why I ask is that, let's say there were 4 different sites on 4 different farms. Each farm would have a different management style.
Exactly. So because of sample size, right, we could, Clements, yes, analyzed some of those data, especially for yields, because crops were different in different fields. So yes, done that by site, but for this, what I did was management practices are different. Maybe your soils are slightly different. Maybe you even had a different company do the pipeline construction. So we factored all those, we considered that a random variable. So we considered that. So we removed, when we are analyzing, instead of comparing the sites, we accounted for the variability, the site-to-site variability, and that site, it includes all the management practices, all the environmental soil conditions that vary from one site to another. Yes.
Thanks for that. There was a question there? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Tom?
So, if I can be clear, the samples that you took were over the pipeline, it's the trench itself and not actually where the road, where all the traffic is. Is that correct?
Yes. So yes, that's what we did for. So what we did, so to correct myself, not only directly above the pipeline, but also we went, a few meters, maybe up to 10 meters away from that. So we didn't separate that. Okay, this is because your trench basically is about 2 meters, right? So we didn't separate that, but all the same, we're restricted to very close to that to the trench line.
Yeah, we've seen very similar results, right? Over the pipe, over actually the trench,
Yes,
the
yes.
penetration resistance the first year possibly is actually quite low because of the fact that the soil hasn't settled.
Yeah.
But then it does exactly what you did showing here, it subsides. That's where the farmers get upset.
Exactly,
Because
exactly.
They don't like their $200,000 equipment
No,
dipping down
no,
into
no.
the drainage
Exactly.
system.
Yeah. And and they try their best to manage these soils, like on the right of ways. One of the farmers that we worked with, he applies twice the fertilizer rate on the right of ways, and his seeding rate, he uses up to twice the seeding rate. So we did some plant counts there. We haven't analyzed the data yet, but still in those fields, his yields are up to 40% lower than on the undisturbed parts of the field. Yeah. So they are doing everything that they can do, but because there's nothing that they can do about the temperature and the moisture loss, they are unable to control that.
Nike, go ahead.
So, Francis, I have a question about bulk density.
Yes.
So, if you took measurements of bulk density between the protection and the area that hasn't been, because looking at the picture that you're showing there,
Yes.
what it seems to me is that on top of the pipe being heated, if you're compacting the soil and increasing the contact points between particles in a saturated system like that, your thermal conductivity should be really high. So not only the pipe is really warm, but the soil is conducting a lot of heat as well.
Yes. So we didn't make specific comparison, but it will be very interesting actually to compare the bulk density, like on the trench line versus immediately, like away from the trench line. But we didn't do that, and also we didn't distinguish for the right of way when we were taking those penetrometer measurements. We didn't distinguish between the trench line and a few meters away from that. But that would be very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, time for a last question. Anybody else? Oh, Derek, go ahead.
Did you do any pasture checks, like any of your yield results?
Oh, no, we didn't, yeah. So actually the energy regulator, they were interested in that. So they wanted us to look at forested sites. They wanted us to look at, pasture land as well. That would have been really, really ambitious. So I gave them the budget. It would go maybe close to $1.5 million, like, in less than 2 years. And so they decided, okay, let's just go with cropland for now.
Was some of the cropland alfalfa?
No, there wasn't alfalfa. Yeah.
So none of those were hay fields that you studied?
Sorry?
They were all like grain fields that were oilseeds. They were not hay fields.
Well, we had no hay fields. Yeah.
I think Francis is going to get lots of calls to serve as an expert witness in these lawsuits. So good luck with that.
Get into trouble, eh?
Well, that ends our seminar today. Well, help me thank Francis for this excellent presentation. Just a final reminder, we have the Sustainability of Canadian Agriculture Conference, March 12th to 14th. So please register. It's virtual, it's free. It's grad student presentations, some workshops, excellent presentations from Indigenous scholars. So keep that in mind, put that into your calendar, March 12th to 14th. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you for coming.